Okay, we're back on State Your Case. I'm George Korda. This is Newstalk 98.7, the news and talk of East Tennessee. Let's bring Dan Mariaschin on here, CEO of B'rith International. Dan, thanks for joining us, and I'm sorry for the confusion that I caused.
No, I don't even know what you're talking about, but thank you for having me back, George. I appreciate it.
Well, I gave you the wrong number.
Well, we're here. That's the main thing.
That's the important thing. Yes, we have overcome my inefficiency. So let's get right to it. What,
Sure.
In the wake of the continuing war, now coming up on 4 months since the October 7th attack by Hamas on that music festival in southern Israel and then homes and people around the festival, where would you set, in terms of your observations, the level of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic acts you're seeing in the United States?
Yeah, it's amazing that this entire thing has been turned really on its head. What happened on October 7th was really a glimpse into what the Holocaust was like in Europe between 1939 and 1945. Massacres, the killing and beheading of babies, killing parents in front of their children, children in front of their parents. I mean, the rapes, all of that. And it seems that that's really all been forgotten. And the intellectual scam that's going on and has gone on over the last few months has been that the victim has been turned into the victimizer. Now, if you fight Hamas, you're fighting an asymmetrical war. Asymmetrical meaning what? Israel has a conventional army, but it has to fight an enemy that hides behind its own people and uses them as human shields and stores weapons in schools and homes, mosques, hospitals. And so in order to defeat that enemy, which is the goal here, the goal is to eliminate Hamas, to eliminate its political profile, to eliminate its military profile. In order to do that, it's not easy. And the Israelis are still at it in the southern part of Gaza. They've had the successes in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. But the fighting still goes on. This is an enemy. It is a terrorist enemy. And by the way, it's not just that they seek the elimination of Israel and to kill Jews. They are on the same wavelength when it comes to Christians and to others. This is a serious enemy that really needs to be defeated.
So throughout the country, there are, in particular on college campuses, there are pro-Palestinian demonstrations, protests. There have been any number of acts of violence. I was reading this morning about a man who drove his car into a group of Jewish people. And in the wake of this, there's a natural tendency to think, and here's the thinking. This is what I've observed some people talking about the last few days. The United States is now retaliating against attacks on our forces in Syria and Iraq, and against the Houthis in Yemen. And 3 American military personnel were killed. American soldiers were killed the other day. And the effort here on the American left is to say we are the targets because we support Israel. How do you answer that?
Well, we're the targets, first of all, because Iran, which is the sponsor of all of these groups, of the Houthis, the Iraqis, the Syrians, these proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, all of this comes out of Iran. The money, the training, the weapons. Now, Iran sees the U.S., and this is their language, they see the U.S. as the big Satan and Israel as the little Satan. So Israel's not going anywhere, but we do have troops. We're there to fight ISIS, that we still have troops in Syria and we have troops in Iraq. The Iranians want the U.S. out of, not just out of those countries, they want the U.S. out of the Middle East. You know, for a couple of years here, there was an attempt to go after the Iranians in terms of trying to, to do a deal with them, to get them back into a negotiating stance. Every time we tried that, I say we, the United States, every time we tried that, the Iranians have stuck a finger in our eyes repeatedly. They continue to go after a nuclear weapon. They continue to support all of these terrorist organizations. And unless we address the Iranian head of the snake here, these problems are going to continue. By the way, the tragic attack on our base, which killed our 3 service people and wounded 40 others, that's the latest. There are now over 160 incidents over the last few months since October 7th, and many before that. 160 instances of attacks by Iranian proxies on American troops. They want us out of the Middle East. So our fight here and Israel's fight is more or less the same in terms of the Iranian threat. And by the way, there are a number of Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, they don't want the Iranians to have this kind of power either. So we're all pretty much on the same side. And to put this all onto Israel, after all, what is it they're trying to destroy the state of Israel? They're trying to kill the Jews, the Israelis who are Jews. They're trying to kill them. That's the objective here. So Israel has an existential fight on its hands, but the United States has a fight too. Because if we lose out to the Iranians and their proxies, we will be subject to their domination of the region. And that affects oil, it affects shipping lanes, and if they get a nuclear weapon, they're going to have that umbrella. We need to address these threats directly.
But for people who are anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, Israel is the reason. If only, look, I once heard years ago, and I've tried to find out who it was that said this, and I can't find it, but it was great. I was watching a news program, and there was some political whiz on there, and he said, the American people like their solutions simple and stupid. And I thought, well, that's kind of insulting. Then I got to thinking about it. This is an example. In a way, gee, if only we didn't support Israel, these guys would like us. And it brings to mind a speech that Winston Churchill gave in 1940 when England was standing alone against Nazi Germany. And there were people calling for negotiations with Hitler and for make a peace pact with Hitler so the war ends, leaving, of course, Hitler in power in Germany. And Churchill absolutely refused. And in this speech, he said this about these other countries that were looking to just get along. Why don't you guys just go along so this will stop? Churchill said, each one hopes that if he feeds the crocodile enough, the crocodile will eat him last. All of them hope that the storm will pass before their turn comes to be devoured. And this is somewhat similar situation for the United States.
Yeah, very similar. And Churchill was really the way in. He was a courageous guy, and he was a very perceptive guy, and of course, a real leader. Look, you're absolutely right. One of the things in this country, we are blessed with having Canada on the north, Mexico on the south, 2 oceans on the other side of our country. It's very hard for us to relate to the neighborhood in which Israel lives. And part of that neighborhood is seeking to destroy it. And you're right, you cannot feed the beast. We've tried that with the Iranians. We've forgotten. They were responsible, if you remember, for killing 241 U.S. Marines back in the 1980s. This Iranian regime is absolutely anti-American. They call us the big Satan. They mean it. So we really need to deal with it. And Israel, of course, is not asking for any help from anybody. It wants to finish the job, and it wants to do it itself. By the way, it also doesn't like to have their military efforts micromanaged. There was a couple of articles about 6 weeks ago that in a couple of the big newspapers, which were talking about, well, should Israel use 1,000-pound bombs, or why shouldn't it use 500-pound bombs? Whatever it needs to do, it needs to defeat this enemy. Israel is being very careful to avoid civilian casualties, but it needs to defeat this enemy. George, if I can, you mentioned the campus. And this is a very important challenge right now, the anti-Semitism on campus, because so many Jewish students are being harassed. They are being bullied. They're being intimidated. They're the subject of an intense anti-Israel, anti-Semitic campaign on many of the college campuses. And you'll recall a few weeks ago, 3 leading university presidents, 2 of which are not now in that position anymore, testified before the House of Representatives here in Washington. And what their testimony revealed is a total lack of moral clarity. These students, if they're being intimidated, they need to be protected. And their free speech rights also need to be defended. And they shouldn't have university administrators who are looking to avoid conflict and over the issue of speech, of hate speech. They need to engage in that fight and to turn it back. So one of the things that we're doing, by the way, is we are working with the U.S. Department of Education, which is taking complaints from these campuses, from the students, and providing some guidance. I mean, we have to work very hard on this issue because Jewish students have rights, and they should not have to be subject to this kind of intimidation.
All right, we're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll talk more with Dan Mariaschin, the CEO of B'rith International. And all right, we're back on State Your Case. I'm George Korda. This is Newstalk 98.7, the news and talk of East Tennessee. Our guest is Dan Mariaschin, who is the CEO of B'rith International, one of the largest Jewish organizations in the world. And what are you doing, Dan? What can you do with respect to the incidents that are taking place on college campuses?
Well, first of all, there has to be an across-the-board accountability by university, college administrators that they're going to deal with this issue. There has been an executive order out there now for several years under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to make sure that Jewish students are protected, as are all others, against hate crimes on college campuses. And that executive order needs to be codified, and so we're asking the administration to codify it. But in more practical terms, the hearing that was held by the House with the 3 university presidents several weeks ago was extremely important because it laid bare the paucity of the lack of moral clarity on college campuses. What was the back and forth with the president of Harvard? The back and forth was, if there's a call for genocide against the Jewish people, does that cross the red line in your code of conduct on the campus? And the answer by the president was, well, it depends on the context. Well, listen, if you call for genocide against Jews, if you call for the elimination of the state of Israel, what does that mean, the elimination of the state of Israel? We saw what happened in just 10 hours when Hamas went in across the border and killed 1,200 people and took a couple of hundred hostages and did the most barbaric crimes that we've seen since the Holocaust. That's not just simple talk. That's serious.
Well, see, one of the things that I don't understand is why the member of Congress questioning Harvard's president when she said, well, it depends on the context. If she'd have looked at her and said, would that be true if students on campus were calling for the destruction of or the deaths of blacks or Hispanics or gays? She'd have said, of course, there wouldn't have been a depends on the context answer. The depends on the context answer was given because it wasn't talking about blacks or Hispanics or gays. It was talking about Jews.
It should have been a simple answer, even if, and we know how that the three presidents came prepared with remarks that had been over by attorneys. It should have been an obvious and easy answer, so obvious. Call for genocide, of course it crosses the line. That's really what they should have done. And frankly, to lawyer up on these issues, use some common sense. This is common sense. And no student should be vulnerable, no matter what community they come from. You're absolutely right. And there should be protection for all. And that's really the issue. Now, there's one other thing here. Look, there are a lot of students that are joining these demonstrations on campus, these protests, not just on campus, by the way. New York City, a couple of weeks ago, we had big demonstrations in front of, for example, the Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital. This is perhaps the leading cancer treatment hospital in the country. Why were they out there? They were out there because some of the supporters and the donors, not to mention many of the patients, at Memorial Sloan Kettering are Jews, and therefore they must be supporters of Israel. Now, a lot of the kids, I say kids, a lot of the young people who go out to these demonstrations, frankly, they couldn't find Gaza on a map if they tried. They couldn't find Israel on a map if they tried. They're told that Israelis are colonial occupiers. I mean, this is what they're told, and they go out. They're being, frankly, many of them are being manipulated, but they're being manipulated by people who have a purpose, and the purpose here is to demonize and delegitimize Israel, and by extension, to demonize and delegitimize its supporters, whether they're college kids on campus or whether they're people out there in the general community, Jewish and non-Jewish, by the way.
Do you see it getting worse or better with it in terms of? See, one of the things is Americans kind of feel like, well, we've got some leverage over Israel. We don't have any leverage over Iran. So it's easier to try to make the person that you're closest to change their behavior than it is to, with an authoritarian religious theocracy like Iran, to make them change their behavior. They have no intention of changing their behavior. So as long as they don't, what can you do?
Yeah, it's such a good point, George. Absolutely right. Look, we have to see Iran as the real current threat of the moment to the United States and to Western democracies. This is not their ambitions run far beyond the Middle East, and you're right. It is easier to lean on Israel, and it's harder to lean on Iran. Look, right now, we have this issue of if we really retaliate and we really make some kind of statement. And by the way, it doesn't have to be all-out war. It doesn't have to be. You talk about that we're concerned that this not expand. It doesn't have to be. We can reimpose sanctions. We can make sure that there's accountability on the sanctions that are in place. We can stop the Iranians from using the international banking system. We can stop the Iranian traffic in oil. There are ways to bring the Iranians to their feet without going into an all-out war. But before you can do that, you have to recognize that Iran cannot ever be, not under this regime, cannot ever be a partner for anything. It is the threat to democracies right now, real time, at the moment. And until we recognize that, we're not going to be able to bring the level of heat and fire in the Middle East down, at least to a manageable level, and have a horizon that looks towards some kind of peace in the region.
All right. We got about 2 minutes left. I want to do one thing real quick. I want to read this. This is to give people an idea who aren't hearing about that, what happened on October 7th anymore. This is something that I found the other day. This is according to the New York Times, which ran an investigation on claims of Hamas sexual atrocities in the attack. Here's what the Times found out. A Times investigation uncovered new details showing a pattern of rape, mutilation, and extreme brutality against women in the attacks on Israel. So you've got all of these things out there, but the cry is being heard over and over again, Israel, stop the fighting. You got about 45 seconds to tell us what your thoughts are on this.
Well, first of all, about the violence against women, I'll tell you, George, there was a deafening silence from the major women's organizations in this country and for a long time from the United Nations. So that needs to change. The second thing is Israel needs to be able to complete what it has to do to eliminate the threat posed by Hamas. If not, it will be a big victory in Tehran, in Iran, and they will continue to fuel chaos and instability in the region unless Israel is able to finish the job.
All right, Dan Mariaschin, with the CEO of B'rith International. Thank you for joining us, and I'll be coming back to you again in the future.
All right, thank you, George. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you.